an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Elder Empire, C Book 3, Chapters 3, 4, and 5. In these chapters, we get to see them getting ready for this big meeting with the guild heads. We get to see that through Calder's eyes. It looks surprisingly very similar to Shera's view. And we also find out that Calder was sent to retrieve the Emperor's crown, which I was not expecting. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you so much to Asher for commissioning this episode. So this is for two things. One, I was genuinely surprised at how similar the view seemed from Calder's perspective, but I haven't gone back to check, and there is one part that I thought I recalled, which is that the people were, like, from Shera's perspective, not quite as thrilled with Calder and his crew as he seems to think they are. And I can't tell if that was just her bias or if I'm remembering wrong. But that's the only disparity that I really could remember. And secondly, I don't know how many other people are listening to the audiobook for this, but I found it so weird. You know how it says present day? It'll say chapter 3 and then present day. In the audiobook, it will have the present day separate from the chapter 3 and its own length of time, 30 seconds or 15 seconds. And so I kept thinking I had overread because when I looked down, it no longer said chapter 5, but it turned out it was because it was in the 3 years ago, which is an entirely separate chapter according to the audiobook. I'm just really learning as I do more of this how disorganized audiobooks can be in comparison to a book, even though they're professionally produced. Because this was not an issue in the other 2 books of the same series, or 4 books, I suppose. But it was the same for this one and for Shera's book, the final third books of each series. God, this is so confusing to talk about. Anyway, I just wanted to put that out there because I do kind of find it fascinating, and I'm just like, who makes these decisions? Why did they do that? So we have this moment here in chapter 3 where Calder is going to go and visit his ship because, reminder, it's his soul-bound vessel. And he has a hard time, as we've been told. Soul-bound vessels are not an easy thing to just abandon. So he has this sense of really extreme loss the first time that he leaves it at the coast hidden somewhere, and almost a sense of I'm never going to see it again. And he decides that he is going to go out of his way to prove that feeling wrong. So he schedules a visit to go back. And he comes to the ship. He's got his whole guard with him, escorting him. And he sees his crew all waiting for him. And they all appear to be kind of ready to go. They just seem in this attitude of they're anticipating him. It lifted Calder's spirits to see them, though he couldn't help but eye the gaps between them. Uzziah would have laughed and thrown his arms around Andal, and Jerry would have rushed up to greet him. The empty spaces made his heart ache, but he hadn't expected any of the crew. And Calder is assuming that they are all returning to the ship out of a sense of sentimentality, I think. I believe that he is seeing it as like, it's, even though it's my soulbound vessel, it's also been home for all of us for such a long time, and we are all part of the same team. And so they would rather be here where it feels sort of familiar and like they're on their home turf. But what we find out is that they were instructed to come here. When he commanded that he was going to be taken to his vessel, he hadn't been aware of the fact that his entire crew was going to be forced to meet him here, which really bummed me out like a lot. There was something about the fact that not only did he not intend for that, but that's the way his order was interpreted, but also that he assumed there was a sentimentality here, and there isn't. It's not to say that they don't care about him, but it's really the end of an era. He is moving on to something with being emperor at this point very clearly that is like, what this is the thing, isn't it? Always. He's moving on to something, achieving a goal. And in his heart, he wants to believe that everything he has had up to the point of reaching this goal is always going to be there and still be the same. And I really do understand that. It's such a hard thing about like moving on with your life and knowing that everybody else is all doing the same thing. And you can be simultaneously happy for them that they're finding a path for themselves, but they had a particular place in your life and they're not occupying that place anymore. And for a while, it will feel like you need to try and force them into that spot, find somebody to replace them in that spot, or you're just going to have a weird empty space in your life for a while. And really what happens is that the space they occupied changes and you adjust, and maybe you continue to have a relationship or not, depending. But there's always a sort of grief that comes with these massive changes, even when it's something that you have wanted and been after. And I think that Calder has been wanting to have the safety of his like familiar group of people to go to, because he isn't feeling great about his position here. He has allegedly kind of achieved what he set out to do. He has become emperor, but none of it is for real. It doesn't seem like he isn't being taken seriously. He doesn't have the kind of power that he really, and I mean this in like both a political sense, but also the very practical power sense of the type of reader the emperor had been. He doesn't have the tools that he needs to do the job the way he needs to do it. And having this little community of familiar people doing familiar things is a comfort and a sort of safety blanket. And this scene, he realizes that he doesn't actually have it. And part of me thinks that's a good thing, because it's going to force him to really focus more, I think. But I also felt for him here, because I really understand how this works. It's such an odd sensation, especially like one of the comparisons that I want to make is like graduating high school, and you sort of think about everybody that you used to know and you picture them still in the cafeteria or in the classroom or the hallways in the way that you always encountered them. And then you have to adjust and realize, no, they have also gone to different colleges. They are also moving out, doing things. But my experience with like graduating school was so weird and not typical that I can't even make that comparison and truly relate to it. But yeah, he says, I didn't intend any kind of order. And Foster says, lucky you. You have people that listen to orders whether you want them to or not. Calder hadn't made a plan or even looked too closely at his own intentions. He simply wanted to feel the old deck beneath his feet. Even wearing these armored boots, it was good to feel a connection to his vessel, from its slick green-black seamless deck to the green-veined stretch of sails currently furrowed like a wing overhead. Can I tell y'all how much I forget what his vessel looks like? And that sounds crazy. Tapping into Kellerak's warm handprint on his arm, Calder sent his intent deeper into the ship. Through the chains at the bottom of its hull, his awareness dove to the Leviathan, manacled and resting above the sea floor. And it asks him for sharks. And he's a little bit startled for a couple reasons. Firstly, that it's never really needed him to feed it. It's always managed to hunt on its own, and it needs to eat really sparingly. Months or years can pass without it having to eat at all. But also, it's demanding this in return for a favor that Calder considers paid already. And I am not remembering what this favor is. I don't know if I'm supposed to. But either way, I thought that was kind of suspect. Like, he is immediately agreeing that to do the thing that this Leviathan is asking, simply to keep it happy. But this is a being that's going to have an extremely, I would assume, accurate count of the favors owed and paid. And the fact that it seems to have weirdly forgotten that it's been paid back, I think is really weird and makes me kind of worried that this means something else. I don't know if it's tricking him because it's going to do something of its own, or it's like prepping because it can sense shit's about to go down and it's like, I need to be on my game, so please give me extra food. But either way, it's something. It's something for sure. So let's see. The other two ships in this harbor were returning from the consultant's former headquarters, bearing teams of readers and investigators determined to unlock the secrets of the Grey Island. And I really was sort of like wanting to have an in-depth talk with them and see what they figured out. Because there's a big part of me that's like, I hope you guys couldn't figure out shit. And it's weird because I'm not even really on the consultant's side. It's just more like the principle of the thing. I want them to have been good enough at their job that people who are sent for this express purpose are not as successful as they were expecting. So this is when Calder says, my apologies, everyone. Make yourself at home. I only plan to spend an hour here, and you're welcome to return with me to the palace afterward. And Pearl says, well, I wanted to talk to you about that. I found a job. That was a surprise blow, and it landed square on Calder's chin. And I really liked that line. I really did. That's so... There are some things that will just sort of knock you down, and it's always wild how unpredictable it is. You'll be told something really like dramatic, and you'll just be kind of like, oh, wow, so the world's like this, cool. And then there'll be something that feels sort of like petty, and you need to like sit down. And I had left Brendan, my ex-husband. I was moved in with my mom temporarily in the beginnings of a relationship with Owen, and feeling like I really was done with my life in Philadelphia, and it was a totally new chapter starting to open. But my mom told me that she was still friends with Brendan on Facebook and that he had a new girlfriend. And I, for an instant, felt like I might throw up. And it was so weird because I had no desire to still be with him at all. I know that sometimes that can be a thing. People leave someone, but they either have regrets or they still miss them. It was not like that. And I'm normally really not. When I'm broken up, I am pretty much done. Oftentimes, by the time I'm broken up, I've been done for a minute. But nevertheless, that news just was like, it was such a shock and came out of left field because we were not really like talking about anything to do with him. And I will never forget the like moment of, oh, wow. And again, that's a signal of like other people also moving on with their lives. I had left in a very dramatic fashion, I may add, and was sort of just expecting him to keep on doing what he had always done by himself, and finding out he wasn't. He was living his life. It's a shock. You expect the world to revolve around you, you know? It's just like a human trait and something that we all have to constantly be aware of. So he asks, like, are you not being taken care of? And she's like, well, no, that's not the problem. But if we're not going to be sailing anymore, it's like a research position with the Champions Guild. I have experience with it all, and a lot of their staff left and they need alchemists. And she looks at him and she's obviously like kind of worried that he's going to be mad at her. And he's a little bit like, he's of course sad about it, but he also knows she's super talented. And the fact that she's getting this position is actually like a big deal for her. And it's her being finally recognized after sort of being shut out of alchemy, you know? So he is like trying to be happy for her. He is happy for her. He's trying to express it convincingly. And he tells her congratulations. And then we have Andal, who walks up, and I love this. Calder saw only compassion in Andal's eyes, so he braced himself for more bad news. That's also a good line. Just like, oh boy, you've got that look on your face, so I'm going to assume this is about to be really rough. Here we go. I've been looking for a position with the witnesses. I wouldn't do any better as a silent one than Petal would as a champion, but they need paper pushers and staff managers just like anyone else. I have a few leads. Failing that, I don't mind looking outside the guilds. There's been a delivery company making a fortune since the Emperor's death, and I'm sure they could use a man who's used to checking the content of boxes against a master list. And Calder, at this point, is kind of starting to panic and tries to tell them, you guys know I wasn't leaving you behind. I was going to find positions for all of you at the palace. And Andal says once the treaty is signed, you won't need us anymore. And that is absolutely not true. And Calder knows it's not, but he doesn't really know how to tell him so. And I was surprised. I mean, I think really what it is, it does not feel like the moment to argue. You don't want somebody who's telling you about something they're clearly kind of excited about, that maybe you can find a way for that to not happen for them. But it isn't really true. And Andal tries to tell him, like, overall, this is a good thing. If things are finally calming down, if we're going to be in a place of peace, having regular jobs that we can support ourselves with and live normal lives is really, like, this is kind of what we've been wanting, you know? And he also says something about how, like, look, it's not like we're just disappearing on you either. You're in the position where you can get us, like, yanked out of bed and forced to meet you on the ship. You'll be able to see us whenever you want. It'll be fine. And I love when Foster starts, like, making really obvious noises because he's cleaning out a cannon. Calder says, how about you, Foster? Are you going anywhere? He had almost asked, are you leaving me too? Calder, you're breaking my heart. And he says, basically, I'm retired and I don't have anywhere to go, so I'm sticking around. And that's at least one person that Calder is like relieved about. I'm sorry for interrupting your morning. The guards will escort you wherever you wish to go. Petal tries to say something, but didn't seem to be able to get the words out. She threw her arms around his neck and wept into his shoulder. You guys, Petal is so cute. I picture her as like a little mouse, honestly, like a little kind of nervous mouse. And Calder has this conversation with Foster. He says, what am I doing? And Foster says, what do you want to do? And Calder's taken up short because there are some people that are the type to answer a question with a question, but Foster's really not one of them. And he says, I want to show everyone I can do the job. And Foster says, all right, but you can't. And I was really stunned that he just says it. And then he says, the Emperor did something great by protecting everyone from the elders. Then he stuck around for an extra 2,000 years because he couldn't trust anyone else's hand at the wheel. But if you're trying to fill the man's shoes, you should at least learn from him. Though Calder now had access to most of the Emperor's belongings, he had actively avoided reading them. For one thing, the Emperor left behind a weight and intensity of intent in his most prized belongings. The longer Calder was around them, the more it felt like they were pushing into his head. It was disturbing. For another thing, Calder hated the man. I've got time, Foster. I'll settle into it. The gunner barked a laugh. All right, when you find a solution to the great elders tearing the sky in half, you send for me. Good luck. So what is it that Foster's really saying? That he needs to be reading the Emperor's stuff in order to figure out how to do the job better? That's the way that Calder's clearly interpreting it, but I'm not entirely sure that's what Foster is saying. I don't know. And this is the danger, of course, is that Calder hated the man. And yet he's over here trying to take over his position. And that's always like, are you going to just turn into the guy? Once you start to get some information that you maybe didn't have before, once there's also the Optasia, which just feels like I'm just so worried about the fact that it hasn't been destroyed and it's been guarded, basically. They've like put restrictions around it physically. But there's just so much about this that I'm wondering if the fact that Calder seems to come back from the dead later in this, as we know from Shera's, is going to be linked to what Foster is trying to tell him here. Did he read something or like bind to something that can save him? And he better not have fucking attached himself to Nikothi's heart or something, because I will be disgusted with him. But God knows. I mean, anyway. So Teach comes to meet with him and is asking him about how the Independents agreed to this meeting. And she is here with what's his face, the other champion, because Kern wants to see his reaction to the news that he isn't like going to be part of this. This is what we decided. The paper was divided in two. Across the top were written the names Azea and Calazan Farstrider, twin heads of the Witness Guild. On the left were the names of all three regions and heads of 4 independent guilds, the Alchemists, Consultants, Green Wardens, and Luminian Order. The right side bore the names of the Imperialist guild heads, with a circled question mark next to the Magisters. He didn't see his own name on the list. So he notices this, and then rather than addressing that, asks Kern what's in the bag that he's holding. I was like, but why? Like, it just feels like he's trying to throw everybody off balance and buy himself some time to adjust his reaction. I think he's trying to, like, maintain control of the situation, I suppose. But I really just wanted to be like, Calder, babe, just fucking stay on the fucking subject here, kiddo. Like, stop it. But Kern tells him, chocolate biscuits. I don't get to this side of the city often, and there's a bakery on Peregrine and Gazriel that serves my wife's favorite. He hefted his other arm, indicating the rocking horse. This is a present for my son Torrance. He collects them. And eventually, poor Kern winds up breaking this, like, rocking horse. And I was just so sad about it. I know Kern doesn't make it. And knowing about all of, like, his family and everything at this point makes that so much sadder. Also, I'm just going to ask the question. Kern is out here just accidentally breaking solid wooden objects because he just had an emotion. How is he fucking? Like, how does he just not break his wife in half? I just asking. Because it feels like the kind of thing that you really have to be careful about to the point where it might take all the fun out of it. In a very, like, sort of Edward Cullen thing. You know? I don't know. So, he says, I wanted to see your reaction. And Calder is really, what he focuses on here is he knows that he has to keep Kern on his side. And so he tries to think about the kind of reaction that Kern would respect, but also something that's genuinely thoughtful. And he says, first, a room, that's a volatile room full of powerful people. We can't avoid inviting any of them. But with all three regions in one room, they have us outnumbered and outgunned. We announce I'll be going, but it's only for the public. We send a double instead, which they allow because they don't care about meeting the real me, which we can afford because we don't actually need my input. Is that correct? And Teach says, believe it or not, my primary concern is your security. Even meeting in a prepared, reinforced room in our own territory, there are no measures we could take to protect against a single individual from so many powerful soulbound. And he basically goes back and forth with her about the security issue. And then he says, you're right. So why protect me at all? If the regents attack us, we lose. Whether I'm there or not, whether we can fight them off or not, we're done. The best case scenario is that you all defeat them, but we will lose people even in that case. We would move forward severely weakened and unable to trust half the guilds. We have to extend them some trust. What better trust than me there in person with no armor or weapons? You all wouldn't have had this conversation if you needed me. Let's use the fact that I'm useless. What are we risking here? I can't emphasize enough how sad this is. Look, he has found a really smart way to wiggle into this situation despite them trying their best to keep him out. And I really respect anybody who can find a way to cheat within the rules. I always kind of grudgingly appreciate it. Even when they are a shitty person, there's always a part of me that's like, well, then the rules should have been written better. Then shit should have been outlined better. They should have just anticipated this. That said, he's essentially advocating for himself by saying how pointless he is. And that just breaks my heart so bad. So yeah, they finally, they don't even agree with him. It's just sort of that he says, I'll take it as a yes. So, I'm sorry, in the chat, Evil says, it's not like a soul bond. Their deals are more human-like, but if the 5,000-ton monster wants some extra sharks, you pick your arguments wisely. Jan says, I imagine that champions are like the Unsullied. Either that or he gets a champion wife. I didn't even think about him maybe having a champion wife, Jan. That's a good point. But maybe he does. Maybe they could just like go completely nuts with their strength and it's totally fine. You know what? I hope that's true for his sake. So then we have the moment where he's in his room, and this is when we find out about all of the protections they've put around the Optasia. And it still smells like rotting meat in here, which is such a bummer. They need to get some Yankee candles in there, some wax melons, like go over to Bath and Body Works and buy some wallflowers or something. And he's sort of sensing it. And there's this moment, it didn't seem too dangerous. Maybe he and the Magisters could work out some kind of protection. As he was thinking, he felt a sensation as though a closed eye had suddenly opened. Calder fell to his knees behind the yellow rope, retching and trying not to vomit. It was like he'd called up all his worst memories at once. His father's execution, Jerry's betrayal, Urzaya's death. The Optasia had balled them up and slugged him with them like a fist. But just the feelings, not the memories themselves. That was somewhat strange. Reading usually evoked some kind of image, but this time it was a knot of horror and revulsion with nothing attached to it. Elder intent. It was seeping through the Optasia like an overflowing sewer. That is vivid. Ew. I hate it. I hate it. I really hate it. But, you know, it's confirmation that he can't be fucking with this thing. So at least he has that. And he leaves his quarters, and we have this whole thing where like two of his guards vanish and he doesn't notice. And then the third one starts to vanish and makes a yelp, and he turns around just in time to like see them disappear. And after a moment, Bliss appears. I would like to speak with you privately. What happened to my guards? They are unharmed, physically, but they are also somewhere else. Well, thank you for not whisking me away. What would you like to talk about? And I love this. I'm here to deliver you a message in advance. In advance of what? She blinked at him. The message. Very well, Calder said, as though she had made complete sense. So, at this point, she tells him about the smaller meeting that they want to have. 3 in attendance on each side. And he's like, well, this seems like a good thing, right? It'll be easier if we don't have all the regions together and everything. They are going to make you disarm. And again, he's like, seems much better than before. What's the problem? And she says, I don't like it. And as she says this, his guards begin reappearing. The man was soaking wet, and half his uniform had been torn off and wrapped around his head. I am absolutely dying to know where these people went. I really am. Anybody who's been watching She-Hulk, this is really reminding me of that like cut rate magician who accidentally sent Madison with a Y, but not where you think. I just really was. There's one person who shows back up, and I think it's supposed to be that their hand had already been replaced with a lobster hand, like that they're blended with a chimera. But for a moment, I thought that wherever they went had caused their arm to be replaced with a lobster claw. I don't know. Either way, she says, I don't trust this meeting. The great elders are involved in this somehow, and I don't know how, and that makes me uneasy. I don't want to be uneasy. I want to be eased. And I have said it in Shera's book, and I'm saying it here. The room is super hot for a reason, so that he exposes himself, not that way, so that he exposes the mark of Kellerak on him. this whole thing, the elders are trying to get them together to ensure that they don't trust each other, to like completely throw the shit onto the fan directly. Bliss is right, but it sucks. And I love when he's like, well, we could send you to the meeting. And I love how completely objective she is about herself. Nonsense. No one trusts the Black Watch, and I am notoriously unpredictable. Bless her. She's so great. That seems very logical. It is logical, and I don't trust it. So then we go to chapter 4, and it says, some say the emperor's crown wasn't always gold. In the oldest artwork, he wears a crown of bronze. And immediately I was like, that bitch turned gold, didn't it? And indeed, there had been an accepted, like, oh, he replaced the crown with something more regal as the empire became more like strong and official and real. And then there's the thought, oh, maybe it just turned to gold because he was wearing it. So that sounds more correct to me. I just keep thinking about like the first time that we ever see him talking to Shera, and he has come to the Gray Island, and when he steps on the ground just turns into perfectly made paving stones under his feet. Like, he just kind of seems to process and perfect every substance he comes in contact with without intending it, which is just wild. So this is when we meet Cheska Bennett's quartermaster, Varia Selathir. I don't remember if we have met her before, but I am not remembering this bitch one bit, so apologies. But she is not a fan of Calder. She doesn't like him, and she's hoping that eventually he is just going to like completely fuck up and she's going to have a chance to take him down herself for whatever reason. And I'm deeply curious what this is about, because for me, my immediate reaction was, oh, Varia has a crush on Cheska and feels like maybe he is in competition with her for Cheska's affections or something, even though it doesn't feel like that's the deal between them at all. It doesn't matter sometimes whether it's really there. It's whether somebody thinks it's there. And he is really not looking great right now, and it's just feeling like quite a disadvantage to be seeing somebody who is so judgmental of him when he looks this bad. But he got chased by a sentient ash cloud that like vomited ash onto his entire crew, and it stuck to them. So, and reminder, this is 3 years earlier. So she tells him that Cheska wants to see him immediately, and that it has to be only him. But when he actually gets to Cheska, it's very clear she did not know he was here yet, and this girl Varia just anticipated that she was going to want to see him. And I love that she just came down and was so bossy, and then giggles to herself and was like, I just kind of figured she'd want to see you, but whatever. What a petty bitch. It's delightful. So he gets greeted by Cheska in a way that he is not expecting at all. Varia announces Captain Calder Martin, and she gives him this really intense look. She was stalking up to him now, her eyes fevered. When she reached him, she grabbed a fistful of his soot-caked shirt. He flinched, anticipating her seizing whatever was nearby and beating him across the head with it. Instead, she wrenched him closer, falling into him so her forehead rested against his shoulder. Finally, she breathed. Her head shuddered against him, and he thought she might be crying. And he's just like kind of starting to put his arms around her like he doesn't know what to do. But she throws her head back and laughs and says, I'm free. So again, I'm just going to say that I think Varia thinks there's something between them, because like, look at the greeting she gives him, and like, we know the motivation for it. And I'm sure even Varia knows, but it would make you think. It would make you think a little bit, I think. So she says, I will give it to you straight. Regent Lauralee has been stuck to my backside like a barnacle. And until I pry her off, I can't leave this room. So I've got another mission for you. And she says that the Emperor's crown is missing and they need him to track it down. And the fact that it's missing is just already kind of like, oh, wait, what? Why? And also, of course, Calder has had that prediction not terribly long ago at this point that he is going to become the emperor of the world, which is not, as we know, quite true, at least as far as it seems when the book ends. But he has an expectation here, and so finding the crown would be particularly meaningful for him. And she says, you wouldn't think it'd be hard to find. It's been missing since the night of the Emperor's death. Lauralee dug it up a couple months ago. Akhmagut only knows where she found it. She hired us to ship it to Joran so he could bury it somewhere with proper security. So I assigned it to the Reliable. He didn't make it. I'm going to make him rename the ship. The Limping Lady, maybe. The Snail. We wouldn't have even known Thomason was lost instead of taking the long way around, but we received word this morning that another captain spotted his ship tangled up by a roaming island only a week ago. I love this. Calder's caution spiked at the mention of the roaming islands. Some of them were predatory. Can you imagine? You're a sailor and you can't even trust that land is going to be on your side. Granted, it's always going to be dangerous to just land when you don't know where you are and who's there. But this is sounding like these islands just follow you, which is really just, this place is all too dangerous. It's just too much. It sounds so tiring. So when he asks which island, she says new one, no name, seems to have just grabbed them. And I'm just, it's setting up Calder, right? It's all a setup. Fucking poor Calder, man. What is he even supposed to do against this sort of thing? And he asks why give it to him. But she is essentially like, I need to send the fastest available ship. So you showing up right now is perfect. And he's like, why do we have to rush? And she says the secret is out, which is one reason why the Guildhead's pen hasn't stopped moving today. So everybody is after it. And the idea of everyone sort of converging and trying to take the crown is quite overwhelming. So that is something that you would want to get on top of. She informed us that agents of human interests are not the only rivals we have. We can be ready to sail by sunset, but I need to tell my crew it'll be worth it. And Cheska says, you bring back the crown and the guild will wipe out your debt to the throne. This is like somebody telling me, we'll pay off all your student loans and credit card debt and your taxes. And just casually saying it. It's not a big deal. And then when he's like, okay, but what if we don't find it and we took on this whole mission? We're just not going to get paid. And she says 1,000 gold marks just for making the trip. And another 100 for each member of Thomason's crew you bring back. And 500 for the Reliable. That's on top of the crown, which clears up your debt of, I want to say, 4,500. And I mean, 1,000 just for taking the trip is again, it's so much money. He is being set up. That's all there is to it. And I won't hear any other explanation at all. Okay. So then we go to Jerry. Fucking Jerry. Ruining everything with her goddamn dumbass, fucking dumbass. She is being sent to retrieve it. There will be friends, allies, servants, tools at your disposal when you make landfall. It is the will of the great ones that you bring the crown to us. Do so, and we will restore the world to its natural order. Complete your task at any cost. Nope. So, Chapter 5. Morning of the Talks. And Calder is trying to decide what to wear. And I do appreciate this being something that he considers really carefully, because there is so much importance to clothing, and we just want to act like it's not a big deal, and it's absolutely a big deal, and especially in the position that he is in, it's a big deal. And we know that Shera notices that he isn't wearing the Emperor's clothes and is pleased. She is kind of respecting him a little bit more for the fact that he is himself when he shows up. Not that Shera is the person to impress necessarily, but it is showing that he had some judgment that was correct on the impression it would give. And even the fact that Esther knew the Emperor personally and she's going to be there, I really, really appreciated that he's if I wore the Emperor's clothes, even to somebody who didn't know the Emperor personally, it might look like I'm a child dressing up in their dad's shit, but she did know him. And it's going to look a lot lamer if I do it. So I'm just going to wear my own stuff. And then it's up to which crown. There are two circlets, a silver and a gold. He only really had a right to the silver one, the crown of the imperial steward. And, no surprises. We know that he had the crown way back in the first book. So we know that he and his crew eventually gets it. But here it says he had earned the gold crown as well. He and his crew had shed blood for it, after all. Blood from both humans and elders. So a little bit of a preview there of what this is going to fucking look like. And he decides he's going to go with the gold one because it's bolder. And even if he's not wearing the Emperor's clothes, he needs to have something that really shows he is asserting some authority here. And he's not going to be aggro about it, but he can't be retiring and compliant. It's just not the vibe to go with today. So he puts this on and heads out. Calder's mother is out there, who we haven't seen in a little while. And I had forgotten that they have a pretty good relationship. There's just a sort of distance between them in my mind that actually isn't really there. There's, the distance that's required when they're in a professional setting, but she actually really cares about him and makes it clear she does. And I really do appreciate that he has mixed feelings about her being here, the danger that she's in, but also his mom is watching him become fucking emperor and go out and represent and do the job, and he's very proud of that. So they were let's see. Oh, right, here it is. Here it is. Cheska was elbowing an older captain in the ribs, clearly in the middle of telling a joke, and for only the second time that Calder had ever seen, she put effort into her appearance. Her red hair cascaded down her back in waves, and her outfit, from her tri-cornered hat to the ankles of her pants, was a bright blue trimmed in gold. Medals decorated her chest, though he suspected they were all either self-awarded or meaningless, which is fantastic. Clean and laughing, she was radiant, and when she saw him looking, she shot him a wink that made him clear his throat and glance away. Jerry wouldn't let him forget looking at Cheska no. Jerry was in prison. She had betrayed him. He didn't owe her anything. And that's a really interesting moment. Him sort of being like, ooh, girl, you look good. And catching himself and then catching himself. I just really liked that. He's not used to the situation as it stands. He's still not quite able to keep in mind what's going on, which is not surprising because shit's been happening really fast all on top of each other. So like, you know, to a degree, it's sort of, I'm having also trouble keeping track of it all. So they make this procession, and Geraldus says something to him about the fact that he is really not dressed adequately. He says, I selected my outfit with great care. And at this point, there's this, like, the cheering thing. The imperial palace was massive, often called a city unto itself, and took up almost 20% of the capital. The convoy of the imperialist guilds gathered onlookers from the staff and inhabitants of the palace, who numbered in the tens of thousands, which is wild. They lined the streets, cheering and throwing flower petals, colorful bits of paper, scraps of cloth. Calder wondered if someone had ordered them to. The Rose Tower was 2 miles away, on the eastern side of the palace complex next to the wall. They took time on the march, a performance for the onlookers and for the news sheets for the next day. And I'm wondering, too, did somebody order them to? Like, what's going on here? They come to the Rose Tower, and there are Imperial guards out here, and there are also consultants. He's not able to see them, but he is assuming that they are there. Even one blind man carrying an instrument seemed to be glaring right at them. Maybe Calder was just paranoid. And I want to give a little bit of a shout out there to Kindle for telling me that that line was highlighted 76 times, which makes sense because that's the hint about Joran, who is currently in disguise. And I love that we just get that little bit of a nudge, like, hey, that's, you remember that? So we have the whole, like, I'm kind of running out of time, but it doesn't matter that much because so much of this is what we have seen already in terms of who is here, the people that are with them, how much security they have. And there's the patting down of everyone and them handing over their weapons and how, like, uncomfortable it is for some people versus others. Fucking Nathaniel being really ostentatious about how he's unarmed, which is, you know, we know he is, but he also took that potion, so, like, he's not. And also, he sees Darius Albright, and it turns out that, like, what happened to his face isn't actually common knowledge. And Calder thinks that that his hood is just, like, invested to hide his appearance. He doesn't realize the dude's face is really gone. He had reportedly been scarred in battle against Elder Spawn. So he thinks that it's just like, I'm so ugly, I just don't want you guys to see my face. And really it's, no, my face does not exist anymore. Sorry about that. It's gone. And Carrion stood next to the High Mason and High Shepherd, on whom Calder had been briefed. All 3 of the High Counselors wore the skin-tight black clothing he had seen the consultants wear on the Grey Island, but without the stretch of cloth over the lower half of their faces. Did that mean something? And yes, what it means is that they are not currently on assignment to murder somebody. That's my assumption, which can change at any time, so don't get too comfortable with that. And then he sees Esther 6, has a bit of a moment because this is a regent. And he is meeting Barius for the first time as well. And of course, then there is Shera. And he is trying to deal with his, like, emotions toward her. I love that he sees her expression and how much she clearly wants to just murder him. And there's a sort of comfort for him in the fact that she genuinely wants to murder him and is making it perfectly clear and obvious that she would like to murder him. If anybody doesn't have an issue with that, she'll get right on it. There's just a sincerity and, you know, a genuine quality to that he's like, this is refreshing. Appreciate it. So I love that when we get to be inside his head, Esther 6 asks him, are you sure you want to be wearing that crown? Because it'll be hard for you to concentrate as we like do our deals. And from Shera's POV, we saw him shrug off her suggestion and assure her that it was like no big deal. But once we're in his head, he had actually been considering doing it. And since she has decided to point it out, he won't now. Okay, look, I'm not trying to be paranoid. But would he have like been so careless about taking his jacket off and rolling his sleeves up if the crown wasn't distracting him? Like, if he hadn't let his sort of pride in that moment overtake his better judgment, maybe this wouldn't all have worked the way that it did. And I say worked because I am still under the assumption that he is being fully set up. And I have to think, I again, you guys, the room is so hot. Esther says this to him. Did somebody like put it in her head to point that out to him so that he would expressly not take it off? I know I'm like reaching and making too much of a thing of it, but I just feel so suspicious of absolutely fucking everything. And he sees Teach react really weirdly to Esther, doesn't realize what it is the way that Shera does. And then we have the meeting that we have seen already, him and Shera almost seeming to like see eye to eye on the most important like priorities that they need to focus on, and being conscious of the deal with the elders as much as anything, and being conscious of the crack in the sky as much as anything. And it all feels like it's going in the direction that it should. And so Teach says to them as they're making this deal, we need you to endorse Calder Martin as emperor. Calder had already decided what his position should be in this negotiation. He should be seen pushing for unity at every opportunity. And so he keeps making statements like that about everybody being important, that all of us need each other to function. And, you know, in the midst of this, is when Shera chimes in with the great elders are moving. Like, are we just forgetting about this? We're all locked in the same burning house. It benefits no one to fight while the flames rise. Maybe it was the talk of flames, but Calder was still feeling the heat. As he rolled his sleeves up, he spoke. The more they're focusing on unity, the more that they're talking about maybe getting closer to a deal, the hotter it seems to get for Calder. That's just absolutely the way, right? Like, look, I can't tell if this is all intentional or if I'm reading into it, but it works either way. So it doesn't really matter. I have to mention it. And then, of course, we have the moment where Esther sees the scar on his arm. And it is very clear to him as well, as it had been to Shera, that when she says, I'll read him and find out the truth, that he is not going to survive whatever the reading is she is going to do. And then the fight breaks out. She punched Balthazar Kern straight through the floor. And that is the end of the chapter. So, yeah, shit has gone quite left. And I am so eager to find out how things go down for him. I can't wait, you guys. I am champing at the bit, as they say. I'm really excited, finally. This is the spot. This is the spot where things diverge in such a way, you know? So I am really looking forward to Tuesday next week when I get to read the next section. And by the way, just to touch base on that, it will be chapters 6 through 8. So we will be doing another 3 chapters. All right. I'm going to wrap up. Thank you so much, Asher, for commissioning this. Really appreciate you. Thank you, everyone else, for listening. I hope you're enjoying the coverage. And until next time, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.